$33 billion of taxpayer money was not merely misplaced, reallocated, or casually lost. J.D. Vance did not elevate his voice. In fact, he never raised his volume at all. He remained seated behind the heavy desk of the task force in the Indian Treaty Room, possessing the absolute stillness, patience, and precise focus of a marksman stationed behind a rifle. Across the 40 feet of checkered marble flooring, Governor Gavin Newsom offered a confident smile. It was the polished, practiced grin of a politician who had successfully weathered a brutal recall election, navigated a global pandemic, and spent the better part of 3 decades with television cameras permanently fixed on his face. He had not been formally summoned to this specific room. Rather, he had been invited. And throughout his 27 years in public service, Newsom had never once turned down an invitation that guaranteed media coverage. But on this particular morning, the broadcast lenses were not capturing his best angles. The Vice President's anti-fraud task force had formally requested the California governor's voluntary appearance. His legal counsel had advised him that he could refuse to attend. His political strategists, however, insisted he could not. The Department of Justice was actively investigating his wife for alleged tax fraud, and his former chief of staff had recently pleaded guilty to 23 federal charges. Furthermore, Vance had systematically withheld $1.3 billion from California's Medicaid reimbursements. Millions of American families were still waiting for a straightforward answer to one incredibly simple question: where exactly did their money go? A man quietly assembling the architecture for a 2028 presidential campaign simply could not afford to hide from a question of that magnitude. So, Gavin Newsom arrived prepared to fight. Positioned to Vance's right was a pristine, white 3-ring binder, approximately 3 inches thick. The printed label clearly displayed on its spine read, State of California Homelessness Program Outcomes Data FY 2019 through 2024. No individual sitting in the press gallery was close enough to read the text from that distance, but Newsom's chief of staff certainly could. She leaned over to the aide seated beside her and murmured something under her breath. The aide immediately stopped taking notes. Vance continued speaking. He used the exact same vocal register, delivering each meticulously crafted sentence at the precise speed of the one that preceded it. Before the global pandemic even began, Vance stated, "Your very own state auditor explicitly warned that the Employment Development Department, EDD, suffered from critical vulnerabilities within its identity verification infrastructure." A private data firm known as LexisNexis stepped forward and offered to fundamentally upgrade your fraud detection capabilities, entirely free of charge. Your Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, the specific individual you appointed to the role, flatly turned them down. The official justification she provided was that implementing stricter verification protocols would disproportionately burden communities of color. Vance allowed the gravity of the sentence to settle over the room before moving forward. Miss Su was fully warned. She was offered a complimentary solution. She actively declined it. And when the fraudulent claims began skyrocketing in 2020, her immediate staff dismissed them as mere accidents. Accidents. $1 billion was actively distributed to inmates sitting inside state penitentiaries and county jails. Individuals locked strictly behind bars were actively collecting state unemployment checks, and the system completely failed to catch it because the system had been explicitly instructed not to look. 3 seconds of profound silence followed. Then, Vance translated the massive macroeconomic statistic into a stark, kitchen table reality. $250. That is the exact monetary amount stolen directly from every single family in the United States of America that files an annual tax return. Stolen by sophisticated international crime syndicates, which explicitly includes a Chinese state-sponsored organization that is right now utilizing those exact billions to finance global narcotics, trafficking, and active intelligence operations against American national security. He paused, lowering his volume slightly. While that $33 billion simply vanished into thin air, how many everyday California families desperately dialed the EDD and found themselves entirely unable to get through? How many hard-working citizens lost their apartments because that vital unemployment check never arrived in the mail? How many vulnerable Americans were explicitly instructed to implicitly trust the system, only for that very system to hand their hard-earned money to foreign criminals operating on the opposite side of the globe? He let the heavy questions hang in the air. Every single individual sitting in the gallery who had ever spent agonizing hours waiting on hold for a bureaucratic government office already intrinsically knew the answers. And, Governor, there is one additional matter, Vance continued. You completely failed to pay back the emergency federal loan. 21 other sovereign states accepted the exact same federal loan during the height of the pandemic. 21 other states successfully paid it back. California did not. Consequently, as of today, 4 million distinct California commercial businesses are forced to pay 3 times the standard federal unemployment tax, $126 per individual employee, instead of the baseline $42. This is not because of any failure or error those businesses committed. It is explicitly because you borrowed federal money, your administrative apparatus handed it directly to criminals, and you forwarded the subsequent bill to every single small business owner operating in your state. Newsom shifted his weight and leaned forward. The practiced smile had entirely vanished from his face. In its place emerged a hardened, thoroughly rehearsed expression of defiance. Mr. Vice President, let me be abundantly clear. Fraud is an incredibly serious systemic issue. Absolutely no one in this room is disputing that fact. The state of California has successfully blocked $125 billion in attempted fraud since I first took office. $125 billion. So, before we sit here and begin aggressively pointing fingers, perhaps we should firmly establish who in this specific room has actually been doing the heavy lifting. He deliberately shifted his authoritative gaze toward the bank of television cameras. And do you want to know what the genuine underlying problem is? It is certainly not the state of California. The real issue is that there are millions of Americans sitting comfortably at home right now, largely retired, consuming cable television news for 8 hours every single day, and they legitimately believe that daily habit makes them definitive experts on how to successfully manage a complex state of 40 million diverse people. They are not genuinely searching for constructive solutions. They are desperately searching for someone to blame. And I absolutely refuse to serve as a convenient punching bag for individuals whose absolute biggest contribution to modern governance is leaving a remark in an online comment section. Directly behind him, 2 of his political aides exchanged a brief, knowing glance. It was not a look of concern, it was a look of immense satisfaction. The defensive shield had successfully held, the broadcast cameras had captured the soundbite perfectly. The governor was still standing his ground. $33 billion had vanished. $1 billion of it explicitly funneled to incarcerated felons, and the governor of California had just boldly instructed the Vice President of the United States to take a long look in the mirror. Was Gavin Newsom genuinely about to walk directly out of this hearing room the exact same way he had strolled in, completely untouched? Vance entirely ignored the veiled accusation aimed at the Trump base. He did not utter the president's name. He simply allowed Newsom's aggressive words to dissolve harmlessly into the absolute silence of the grand room. And then, he pivoted the conversation to a place absolutely no one had anticipated. Governor, on the evening of the 6th of November 2020, Vance began, his tone surgical. While your Employment Development Department was actively bleeding billions of dollars, and while everyday California families were being sternly instructed by your office that they absolutely could not gather together to celebrate Thanksgiving, you personally attended an exclusive birthday dinner at the French Laundry restaurant located in Napa Valley. The ambient atmosphere in the room visibly shifted. The muscles in Newsom's jaw instantly tightened. Vance continued, laying out the chronological facts exactly the way he always did methodically, one precise stone at a time. $350 for a single plate. 12 individuals seated together at the table. Not a single protective mask in sight. The governor seated directly adjacent to Dustin Corcoran, the chief executive officer of the California Medical Association, and Janice Norman, the CMA's highest-ranking lobbyist. These are the very 2 individuals whose professional organization officially advised your office on the exact same mandatory restrictions that were forcibly keeping California families physically apart. Vance did not alter his pacing. Your official press office initially informed the media that the dinner took place outdoors. Governor, photographic evidence subsequently obtained by Fox 11, Los Angeles conclusively demonstrated that it took place indoors. An eyewitness explicitly informed a lead reporter that your private party was so exceptionally loud that the restaurant's sliding glass doors actually had to be completely pulled shut. 3 seconds of dead air. During the exact same week that you actively attended that exclusive gathering, you aggressively moved 94% of the entire state of California into the most severe, restrictive pandemic tier. Local restaurants were legally forced to lock their doors. Extended families were firmly told they absolutely could not legally gather in groups exceeding 3 distinct households. You looked directly at the citizens of California and declared that Thanksgiving was effectively canceled. You told them that they could not sit at the very same dinner table with their own biological grandchildren. You insisted that staying physically isolated was the singular, necessary way to keep one another safe. Vance's commanding voice subtly dropped in pitch. It did not carry the fiery resonance of standard political anger. Instead, it carried the solemn, heavy weight of a man intimately recalling a quiet kitchen table featuring one conspicuously empty chair. How many grandparents across the state of California sat entirely alone on that specific Thanksgiving night solely because they genuinely believed you? How many of those individuals ate their turkey dinner while staring at the evening news because their dutiful children were strictly following your mandated rules? How many citizens in this nation never got the profound opportunity to hold someone they deeply loved one final time simply because the hospital administration cited your rules and declared no visitors allowed? He paused for an agonizing count. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. They dutifully followed your strict rules, Governor, every single one of them. They tragically sacrificed precious holidays, milestone birthdays, and absolutely heartbreaking final goodbyes. Meanwhile, you enjoyed a $350 plated dinner sitting next to a medical lobbyist and later attempted to wave it off as a bad mistake. Vance still did not raise his voice. He simply allowed the crushing silence to rapidly build upon itself. And during that exact same calendar month, Governor, your own children, were actively attending an in-person, private educational institution in Sacramento, while public schools across the entire state of California remained tightly padlocked. When CNN directly questioned you regarding this glaring discrepancy, you boldly told them, "I'm a Zoom parent." The network later definitively reported that your statement was entirely inaccurate. Vance completely stopped. He offered no editorial commentary. He did not need to. The raw, unadorned facts had organically arranged themselves into a devastating mosaic that required absolutely no subjective interpretation. He moved steadily forward. Same unwavering voice, same precise register, but the topical subject shifted yet again, transitioning seamlessly from glaring hypocrisy to systemic corruption. Let me inquire about a highly specific piece of legislation, Governor. Back in 2023, you proudly signed Assembly Bill 1228 into law. This specific mandate drastically raised the foundational minimum wage for fast food workers from $16 an hour up to $20 an hour. Every single operational franchise in the state was legally required to comply, except for one very specific, narrowly defined category. Vance laid out the undeniable facts perfectly level and flush. The legal text of the law explicitly exempted any restaurants that physically bake bread on site and sell it as a standalone menu item. That highly specific statutory exemption was perfectly written to exactly match the unique business model of precisely one corporate chain, Panera Bread. The single largest Panera franchise operator in the entire state of California is a man named Greg Flynn. Mr. Flynn is a billionaire. He is the absolute largest franchise operator currently operating within the United States. Mr. Flynn personally donated at least $164,800 to your political gubernatorial campaigns. You both actively attended the exact same high school. In 2014, Mr. Flynn formally purchased a luxury Napa Valley resort that was subsequently managed by your personal hospitality company. Every single one of these facts is a matter of established public record. Vance specifically refused to use the word bribery. He completely avoided the word corruption. He merely placed the undeniable sequence of facts flatly onto the table and allowed them to sit there under the glaring lights. When investigative reporters finally asked you directly about this bizarre exemption, Governor, you dismissively referred to it as mere sausage-making. 5 incredibly long seconds of silence passed. Somewhere deep in the press gallery, a journalist's pen completely stopped scratching against paper. Meanwhile, Vance noted softly, every single Wendy's shift worker operating in Fresno, every Taco Bell employee sweating in Bakersfield, and every struggling teenager working a late-night drive-through window simply to help finance their community college tuition, they all received the strict mandate. They got the $20 minimum, but Mr. Flynn, the documented billionaire who has your direct cell phone number, successfully received the lucrative exemption. Exact same law, Governor, entirely different sets of rules, and you casually brushed it off as sausage-making. Newsom did not patiently wait for the heavy silence to fully settle. Something deep behind his eyes fundamentally shifted. The trademark California charm completely drained from his posture, and the emotion that rapidly replaced it was not anxiety or panic. It was pure, unadulterated political combat. Gavin Newsom had successfully debated Ron DeSantis on a national television broadcast. He had aggressively sparred with Sean Hannity on primetime Fox News. He had survived a treacherous recall election, primarily fueled by his own massive, unforced error. He simply did not rattle easily. And whenever he made the calculated decision to fight, he explicitly fought to draw blood. He lunged forward, placing both hands flat and wide on the polished table. The smile was utterly eradicated. "Mr. Vice President, you genuinely want to sit here and discuss political integrity?" His voice had profoundly changed. It was noticeably harder, carrying the sharp edge of a man who had consciously decided that playing defense was completely over, and launching an attack was the only viable strategy remaining. "Let me actively ask you something that the American people genuinely deserve a straightforward answer to." He let the tense silence build. 1 second, 2 seconds. "You publicly called the exact man you currently serve, and I am quoting your words directly here, America's Hitler. Those are your explicit words, permanently on the historical record, printed in published text, written in a private electronic message, and then subsequently repeated in fully public media interviews. So, logically, either you were blatantly lying back then about a man you now dutifully serve as vice president, or you are blatantly lying right now about deeply caring about honesty and moral integrity. Which exactly is it, Mr. Vice President? Because you absolutely cannot have it both ways." The packed gallery audibly stirred. 2 seasoned reporters immediately stood up from their chairs. A television camera operator rapidly adjusted his lens angle to capture the tension. The entire room physically felt the tectonic shift. This proceeding was no longer a standard congressional hearing. It was a brutal, bare-knuckle brawl. Newsom refused to stop. He pressed his distinct advantage with the primal instinct of a veteran fighter who acutely knows he has just landed a devastating blow. "You are currently sitting in a massive federal building fully financed by hard-working American taxpayers, arrogantly lecturing the elected governor of the world's 5th largest overall economy. California's gross domestic product is mathematically larger than the entire nation of India's. We unequivocally lead this nation in technological innovation, in massive agricultural output, in global entertainment, and in the transition to clean energy. If the state of California were its own independent sovereign country, it would be granted a seat in the G7. So, before you arrogantly sit up there wielding your little white binder and weaponizing your dramatic silence and your sad, judgmental eyes to maliciously question exactly how we run our state, Mr. Vice President, I demand you answer me this. What exactly has the state of Ohio practically produced lately, besides your heavily subsidized Senate seat?" Someone seated in the very back row sharply exhaled. It sounded dangerously close to a genuine laugh. The members of the California political delegation noticeably straightened their spines in their leather chairs. Newsom firmly held Vance's unwavering gaze and absolutely refused to blink. The governor had just thrown a razor-sharp rhetorical knife, and it had landed squarely in the target, the vice president's very own damning words, permanently etched onto the public record. "America's Hitler." And Newsom had effortlessly tossed them across the room like a live fragmentation grenade, the metal pin still visibly bouncing across the checkered marble floor. How exactly does a politician accurately answer a brutal question that intentionally possesses no clean, defensible answer? How do you successfully defend your core integrity when the man sitting directly across the table is actively holding your own historic quotes like a fully loaded weapon aimed at your chest? Vance did not utter a single syllable for 4 agonizing seconds. His right hand slowly moved across the smooth surface of the table. It was not curled into a defensive fist, nor did it betray even the slightest tremble, but it was a distinct movement. For the very first time during the entirety of the long hearing, something beneath his absolute stillness had briefly shifted. Then, he finally spoke. "I." He abruptly stopped, taking a sharp breath. The initial word had emerged slightly too quickly, hanging unfinished in the air, and the sensitive microphone perfectly captured the dead silence that immediately followed it. He centered himself and tried a second time. "I have said certain things in my past that I am simply not proud of." It was clearly not a rehearsed political talking point. It was definitively not written on any of the organized index cards placed directly in front of him. For the very first time that morning, the Vice President of the United States was speaking from a raw, vulnerable place, that absolutely no meticulously crafted script could adequately cover. Then, his vocal tone steadily leveled out. I have been completely public about that fact, and I will individually carry that weight. 3 long seconds passed. Then, his voice fully leveled out. The hardened steel instantaneously returned, not because the inflicted wound was completely unreal, but because the necessary work of the committee was not yet finished. But we are absolutely not gathered here today to endlessly discuss my past public statements, Governor. We are sitting here today specifically because of your administrative record. He allowed the declarative sentence to stand entirely on its own. Then, he seamlessly continued. You actively campaigned for the office of governor, vehemently promising the voters that you would build 3.5 million brand new homes. When investigative reporters later asked you precisely why your administration had successfully built only 640,000, you flippantly dismissed your own promise as a mere stretch goal. I suggest you go tell that to the young, struggling married couple living in San Jose who absolutely cannot afford to purchase a basic starter home priced at $874,000. Go look them in the eye and tell them their entire financial future was merely a stretch goal. Vance paused to let the numbers sink in. Exactly 1.7 million desperate people have permanently fled the state of California since you initially took the oath of office. That staggering figure is literally more than the entire overall population of your own state capital. The U-Haul Corporation has consistently ranked California dead last in net domestic migration for 5 consecutive years running. Those terrified families did not pack up and leave because they actively wanted to, Governor. They left because your specific policy decisions made it financially and fundamentally impossible for them to stay. Vance straightened his posture in his heavy chair. And now, I would very much like to read some of your own explicit public statements directly back to you. In your own exact words. In chronological order. The political boomerang had officially begun its return trajectory. Vance did not read from his detailed notes. He spoke entirely from pure memory. Each distinct quote arrived utterly alone, separated from the subsequent quote by a devastating wall of silence. In the year 2008, while serving as the mayor of San Francisco, you confidently told the assembled press corps, and I am directly quoting you here, I will end homelessness in this city. 3 seconds of total silence. Then, the next quote arrived. In 2019, while actively running for the office of governor, you solemnly promised to construct 3.5 million brand new homes by the year 2025. Silence. In 2022, when journalists factually pointed out that a mere 640,000 housing units had actually been constructed, you dismissively labeled it a stretch goal. The silence was distinctly longer this time. Vance intentionally allowed the massive viewing audience to perform the mental arithmetic. In 2023, while standing confidently at an official press conference with multiple television cameras focused squarely on you, you proudly told the crowded room, you genuinely want to know who is the official homeless czar. I am the homeless czar in the state of California. Vance's steady voice remained perfectly level. He was not gradually building toward a crescendo of performative anger. He was steadily building toward something significantly worse. Absolute, terrifying clarity. In April of 2024, your very own appointed state auditor, Grant Parks, officially released a comprehensive report declaring that your specific administration had actively spent $24 billion on the homelessness crisis, spread across 9 separate state agencies and encompassing more than 30 distinct programs, and had completely failed to consistently track whether a single dollar of it actually worked. He paused again. In September of 2024, a bipartisan coalition of your very own state lawmakers successfully passed formal legislation explicitly requiring your administration to systematically begin tracking that massive spending. It was designated Assembly Bill 2000-903. The Democrats proudly voted for it. The Republicans proudly voted for it. One final, devastating pause. His voice dropped to a low hum. You vetoed it. The single word landed violently in the silent room and simply did not bounce. Newsom's right hand instinctively twitched toward his stack of index cards, then suddenly froze halfway there, looking exactly as though his physical body had initiated a defensive action that his conscious mind had not yet fully approved. Vance casually placed one flat hand directly on top of the thick white binder. He did not immediately open it. $24 billion, Governor. That is mathematically more than the entire gross domestic product of the nation of Iceland. 9 sprawling state agencies, 30 disconnected programs, and a localized homeless population that astronomically skyrocketed from 151,000 individuals to roughly 186,000 individuals entirely on your watch. A massive 23% catastrophic increase, occurring precisely while the remainder of the country's averages consistently went down. He softly tapped the cover of the binder again, still not opening it. My beloved grandmother raised me entirely on a minimum wage paycheck back in Middletown, Ohio. She meticulously counted every single dollar twice. She consistently told me, "There is absolutely nothing lower on this earth than stealing from vulnerable people who simply cannot afford to lose." Newsom instantly seized the brief rhetorical opening. He leaned forward aggressively, his vocal tone steadily restabilizing. Something written deep within his stack of index cards had finally caught his peripheral vision, and he spoke with the desperate conviction of a drowning man who had just managed to find a sliver of solid rock beneath a pool of quicksand. "Mr. Vice President, you just dramatically read me a chronological timeline. Allow me to provide you with a critical, factual element that you conveniently omitted." He squared his tailored shoulders. The trademark charm had not yet returned, but something vaguely resembling it had sheer conviction, or at least its highly practiced performance. When the state auditor officially released that critical report back in April 2024, my administration firmly agreed with every single recommended change, every single one of them. We proactively committed, strictly in writing, to fully implementing them. That official written response was personally signed by the appointed head of our Interagency Council on Homelessness. It is a matter of extensive public record, Mr. Vice President. Absolutely anyone can pull it up and read it. So do not sit up there and maliciously tell the American people that I casually ignored the auditor. I entirely accepted every single finding. I formally put it in writing, and I explicitly directed my entire administrative branch to take immediate action on it. The entire room paused in stunned anticipation. The California delegation noticeably straightened up. The political aide, who had previously been staring intently at her own hands, quickly lifted her head, because the governor was factually correct. The documented written response genuinely existed. The Newsom administration had, in fact, formally agreed with every single recommendation outlined in the state auditor's extensive report. That fact was heavily documented. That fact was established public record. And for a fleeting moment that managed to last just long enough for every broadcast camera in the room to perfectly register it, the embattled governor of California appeared to have miraculously found his secure footing. Vance nodded his head slowly. "You are completely right, Governor. Your administration did, in fact, officially write that specific response. You did explicitly agree with every single recommendation." The massive room held its collective breath. 2 seconds passed. And exactly 5 months later, when the state legislature took those exact same recommendations and officially codified them into law, you formally vetoed the law. He allowed the heavy sentence to crash down. "You completely agreed with the underlying diagnosis, Governor. Then, you actively killed the mandatory cure." Newsom's mouth literally fell open. Absolutely nothing came out. The elaborate rhetorical defense he had brilliantly constructed just 30 seconds prior did not collapse from external pressure. It instantly imploded entirely from within, because the formal written agreement itself had miraculously just become the prosecution's star piece of evidence. He could no longer claim that he fundamentally did not know the systemic problems existed. He had personally signed an official letter stating he deeply understood them. He could absolutely not claim that the state legislature had vastly overreached. They had explicitly written a targeted law based directly on the precise recommendations he had already formally accepted. The only remaining logical question was exactly why a man who fully agreed with the doctor's grim diagnosis would blatantly refuse to swallow the required medicine. And that specific question inherently possessed only one logical answer, and absolutely everyone sitting in that room already intrinsically knew what it was. $24 billion. The vice president had asked only one foundational question. Where exactly did the money go? And for the very first time all day, the slick governor had answered far too quickly. What his eager answer completely missed, and exactly what the vice president chose to do next, is something Gavin Newsom will absolutely never forget. Vance's hands steadily approached the thick binder on the table. Both hands moved in unison, one positioning itself firmly on each side. His thumbs found the heavy metal clasps. "Governor, my staff submitted a legally binding data request to the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. We asked for concrete program outcomes, cost-effectiveness analyses, and empirical evidence proving this massive funding accomplished its goals. We requested data for all 30 distinct programs, encompassing 5 fiscal years and a staggering $24 billion in taxpayer spending. He locked eyes with Newsom. This is exactly what they sent us. The heavy metal clasps aggressively snapped open. In the dead silence, the sharp metallic noise echoed off the massive iron columns. Every head in the press gallery turned. The lead wire photographer rose to her feet. Vance slowly opened the massive binder. Securely positioned inside were pristine white dividers with perfectly printed organizational tabs. Outcomes, cost effectiveness, program results, expenditure tracking. Directly behind every single divider, there was absolutely nothing. Nothing but empty plastic sleeves where hard data inherently should have been. It was an enormous binder designed to hold the answer to a $24 billion question, and the answer was pure absence. They did not send us bad data, Governor, Vance said, letting the words marinate. They did not send us incomplete data. They sent us absolutely nothing. Because there intrinsically is nothing. You actively spent $24 billion of American taxpayers' money, and you kept absolutely no empirical record of whether a single dime of it actually worked. He physically turned the completely open binder around to face Newsom and the cameras. The white dividers dramatically fanned out. Vance casually closed the binder, setting it down with a soft thud. It is not a bad administrative record, Governor. It is simply no record at all. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Every retired public school teacher in Bakersfield who files her taxes meticulously keeps her records. Every disabled veteran in San Diego, counting his monthly check precisely to the final penny, keeps his records. Every hardworking small business owner in Fresno, staring at a crumpled shoebox full of receipts, keeps hers. They do not have the immense power of the world's 5th largest economy behind them. They do not have 9 sprawling bureaucratic agencies, 30 dedicated programs, and $24 billion in public funding. But they still managed to keep every single receipt. Why exactly couldn't you? He leaned forward. Governor, you explicitly agreed with the auditor's devastating findings. You officially signed a public letter declaring you understood the systemic problem. Then, you actively vetoed the exact law that would have fixed it. Give me just one reason. Why? Gavin Newsom slowly opened his mouth. The stark reality is that the state of California has historically always. He abruptly stopped. The sentence possessed no logical ending. Dead air gently moved across his hot microphone. He desperately tried again. We have consistently. He stopped a second time. It was the horrifying, vacant silence of a polished man reaching into his mental vocabulary for a political buzzword, only to find the shelf empty. His shaking fingers finally located a card near the bottom of his perfectly stacked pile and pulled it free. I explicitly vetoed that legislative bill because highly similar baseline legislation already exists. Assembly Bill 166 actively requires strict mandatory reporting for our 2 absolute largest homeless outreach programs. The new bill was entirely redundant. The entire room exhaled. Newsom's chin lifted a fraction of an inch. For exactly 3 seconds, he genuinely believed he had found his footing. Vance slowly nodded. Assembly Bill 166 legally covers exactly 2 programs, Governor. 1 devastating second. You actively fund 30. Exactly 4 words. The fragile political defense ceased to exist. Newsom had just informed the watching nation that tracking a mere 2 out of 30 massive taxpayer-funded programs was perfectly sufficient. His hand retreated to the index cards. He aimlessly turned them over, moving with the crushing resignation of a defeated man confirming no valid answer exists. He carefully placed the entire stack face down on the table, sitting noticeably crooked. For 27 consecutive years, Gavin Newsom had never sat behind an open microphone without knowing exactly what to say. But the messy stack of cards held no answer, the binder held no data, and the hearing room held no exit that bypassed the glaring cameras. Newsom finally spoke. I genuinely believed that the existing legislative framework was completely sufficient. It was the first genuinely honest sentence he had spoken all day, a devastating confession desperately dressed up as a plausible explanation. Vance slowly nodded his head precisely 1 time. His stoic expression visually carried something closer to genuine regret. He spoke exactly 9 simple words. You didn't lose the money, Governor. You stopped looking. The devastating words did not echo. They did not need to. Every complex narrative thread tightly tied itself into one unbreakable knot. The governor had formally agreed with the terminal diagnosis, and then he had actively murdered the cure. Newsom did not offer a response. His disorganized cards lay face down. The thick binder sat silently beside them, completely open and entirely empty. 9 devastating words. One massive, empty binder. And $24 billion in taxpayer funding that no human being can currently account for. America watched. The viral clip ran exactly 9 seconds long. Major networks aggressively aired it immediately before dinner. The phrase, "stopped looking organically," appeared in over 72,000 distinct social media posts significantly before midnight. In Bakersfield, a retired public school teacher named Carol watched the clip on her iPad. She had taught 4th grade for 31 years, meticulously keeping every crumpled receipt from every field trip. She picked up her phone and dialed her daughter in Knoxville, who had left California 2 years prior because a starter home cost $800,000. When the line connected, Carol spoke exactly 4 words. "I told you so." Back in Washington, D.C., the massive white binder continued to sit silently on the heavy wooden table inside the deserted Indian Treaty Room. The pristine dividers were still resting wide open. Behind every single labeled tab was a solemn promise made to the taxpayers. And directly behind every tab, there was absolutely nothing. $24 billion entirely gone, and every single page remaining completely blank.